Kanalımıza lütfen abone olun. Welcome to the deep dive. Today you are stepping into a room where the tension is so thick you could practically cut it with a knife.
Yeah, it really is. We are unpacking a high-stakes 2026 congressional hearing today. And the core documents we are looking at detail a very intense, very public confrontation between Representative Raskin and the Homeland Security Secretary.
Right. She had been in the role for about 13 months at the time. And it's vital to lay out our mission for you right at the start because we are navigating an absolute minefield of highly charged political claims.
Exactly. Our goal here is not to take a side or offer our own political opinions at all. We are acting strictly as impartial guides to the factual record provided in the hearing transcript.
We're going to objectively examine the staggering claims presented regarding government accountability and massive administrative budgets, and of course the fundamental civil liberties of American citizens.
We are looking squarely at the data placed on the record. That is our entire focus for you today.
And the events that triggered this specific confrontation are incredibly heavy. To give you some context, Elimdeki Verilerigura, the city of Minneapolis, had recorded exactly 3 homicides in the entire year of 2020.
And the startling fact presented to the committee is that federal agents under the direct command of the Department of Homeland Security were responsible for 2 of them.
Yeah.
Those 2 incidents formed the factual epicenter of this congressional inquiry. The hearing zeroed in on the massive narrative battle that immediately followed.
I spent a lot of time reading the family testimony in the file. The first incident centers on a 37-year-old woman named Renee Good, and her brother painted this picture of an eternal optimist, a deeply faithful Christian, a mother raising 3 kids, and a poet.
Right.
He said she was the kind of person who could convince you everything would be all right despite immense personal hardship.
And the reality of what happened next is just jarring. The testimony indicates she was simply driving home after dropping her children off at school. She somehow found herself caught in the middle of an active immigration and customs enforcement operation.
She was just caught in the crossfire. And the part that stopped me in my tracks, she was shot 3 times by an agent and bled to death in the driver's seat of her own car.
Which is horrific on its own. But what elevated this to a congressional level was the aftermath. The witness accounts state that agents actively blocked medical professionals from approaching her vehicle,
including a doctor and EMTs who were already on the scene. They were blocked from giving her life-saving aid. You have to imagine what her family felt reading that.
From an analytical standpoint, the committee was hyper-focused on the immediate administrative response to that blockade, or rather the lack of it. Following this event, the Secretary's office offered no public sympathy to her family.
None at all.
They expressed no regret regarding a death at the hands of a federal agent. Instead, the department immediately went on the offensive and labeled Renee Good a domestic extremist.
How do you even apply a label like that so quickly to a mother on her way home from a school drop-off? And it wasn't just Renee. The second individual they discussed, Alex Prey, was also 37. He was a dedicated federal employee himself.
A Veterans Affairs ICU nurse, if I recall correctly.
Yes, an ICU nurse, a former Boy Scout, a choir member. His sister testified he was an outdoorsman who loved his rescue dog, Jewel, and could effortlessly light up any room. On the day he died, he was standing on a public street corner using his smartphone to record agents who were forcefully handling peaceful demonstrators.
Which brings up a critical constitutional question that the representative hammered during the hearing. Americans possess a clear First Amendment right to record government agents operating in public spaces.
Exactly.
That isn't a gray area. That specific right has been unanimously upheld by 8 different federal circuit courts.
But the agents on the ground didn't seem to care about federal circuit. The testimony details that when Alex tried to help a woman, the agents had shoved to the pavement, they deployed pepper spray against him, they tackled him to the ground, and subjected him to intense physical force.
And stripped him of a legally possessed firearm.
Right. And I want to be very clear based on the testimony here. He hadn't drawn the weapon. After completely disarming him, agents fired 10 bullets, killing him. And just like with Renee, before his body was even removed from the scene, the department used the exact same extreme rhetoric.
They claimed, with 0 presented evidence, that Alex was a domestic extremist who wanted to kill law enforcement officers.
It's just devastating.
If we step back and look at the broader institutional behavior, the core of the congressional scrutiny was the stark contrast between the official narrative and the documented reality. The department's public relations machine remained rigidly focused on the claim that heavily armed individuals arrived to disrupt federal law enforcement.
But that narrative fell apart almost immediately, didn't it?
Completely. Local news and brave bystanders using their cell phones pierced through that official framing. What alarmed the committee the most was that the department did not wait for any official investigation to conclude before assigning these labels.
They didn't pause to review forensic evidence or ballistics at all.
No. They went so far as to actively bar state investigators from Minnesota from accessing the crime scenes of their own citizens.
So how did the administration defend this? When the committee pressed them on why they slapped the extremist label on everyday citizens so fast, how did they justify that rapid escalation?
They basically leaned on what you might call the fog of war excuse. During the hearing, they cited the intense chaos of the immediate aftermath on the streets. They argued they were relying on preliminary, unverified reports from agents who were actively on the ground in a high-stress environment.
But unverified reports don't usually result in national press releases declaring dead citizens to be domestic terrorists. Did they ever walk it back?
When repeatedly pressed by Representative Raskin, the official response was to pivot. They called the incidents an absolute tragedy and formally offered condolences to the family.
But basic condolences are not an apology. Condolences do not correct a deliberately false public narrative that smears a victim's reputation.
The critical question that remained entirely unanswered was why a massive federal agency couldn't mandate a simple pause for a proper independent investigation before deploying highly defamatory public label.
It's a heady reality to sit with, and what makes those tragedies even more difficult to process is when the committee shifted gears to look at how this department is funded. You'd assume an agency citing fog of war and operational chaos would be starved for resources or stretched too thin.
You would think so.
But as you found when looking at the financial records, the exact opposite is true. But before we dive into the surreal financial side of this hearing video,
the financial scrutiny portion of the transcript reveals a completely different layer of systemic dysfunction alleged by the committee. To grasp this, you have to understand the sheer scale of the Department of Homeland Security.
It's massive.
They operate with an operational budget that significantly surpasses the GDP of 150 sovereign nations. They employ 250,000 people.
With a budget that massive, the specific line items became a major point of contention. Elendeki, Verilerek, the hearing details an astonishing $220 million budgeted specifically for media consultant contract. $220 million.
And what was that money yielding?
It funded highly produced self-promoting photo opportunities. The most glaring example brought up was a cinematic video of the secretary riding horseback at Mount Rushmore.
Oh, right.
And the detail that really set the committee off is that this promotional horseback video was shot during a federal government shutdown. While other agencies were furloughed, DHS was shooting a West.
It's quite the visual.
On top of that, it came out that the secretary is currently residing rent-free in the official waterfront residence that is traditionally reserved exclusively for the Commandant of the Coast Guard.
The spending on executive travel drew even more intense congressional fire. The record shows authorizations of $172 million to purchase 2 luxury aircraft for the secretary's personal official travel.
Wow.
Furthermore, taxpayer funds were utilized to lease a 3rd aircraft, a $70 million luxury Boeing 737 MAX.
A 737 MAX isn't a puddle jump. I looked at the specs presented in the hearing, and it is fully equipped with a queen-size bedroom in the back, a deluxe serving bar, and 4 flat-screen televisions, all funded entirely by public money.
How did the secretary attempt to justify a flying luxury hotel during her Senate testimony?
It was honestly wild. She claimed there were long-term plans to eventually refurbish this luxury jet into a standard transport plane for mass station. The argument was that buying it now would theoretically save money in the long run.
Which the committee rightly pointed out is a massive stretch of fiscal logic. Representative Raskin used a perfect analogy. He pointed out that this logic is comparable to buying a high-end custom Rolls-Royce today and telling the taxpayers it's a sound investment because you plan to convert it into a municipal transit bus in a few years. It's just fiscal absurdity.
It really is. I mean, a Rolls-Royce into a city bus. But the luxury jets weren't just about the money. There was an anecdote about a recent mid-air incident on one of these government jets that paints a picture of severe entitlement.
Yes, this part of the transcript highlights a level of executive privilege the committee could not ignore. A personal item, specifically the secretary's blanket, was inadvertently left behind on the tarmac and not transferred to her current flight. A blanket. In response to this minor oversight, a special government employee named Corey Lewandowski took it upon himself to fire the pilot mid-flight.
You can't fire a pilot while the plane is in the air. And this wasn't just some private charter pilot either, right?
Not at all. The record notes this pilot is a 2003 graduate of the Coast Guard Academy. He is a highly distinguished United States Coast Guard commander stationed in Washington, D.C.
And the absolute peak absurdity of the situation, the detail that really underscores the dysfunction, is that they had to immediately rehire the commander seconds later. Why? Because there was no one else on board legally or physically qualified to fly the aircraft for the rest.
It's almost darkly comedic. But before we move on to the operational failures,
Right. Because while the airplane anecdotes provide a stark look at executive privilege, the hearing pivoted to something arguably much more concerning. The committee dug into to the systemic shifting of priorities and the hollowing out of the department's core national security mission.
Keep in mind, the fundamental charge of DHS is protecting the homeland. They oversee FEMA, the TSA, the Secret Service, the Coast Guard, Cybersecurity, ICE, and Customs and Border Protection.
But critics in the hearing argued the agency has strayed a massive distance from that core responsibility. It is not just about doing a bad job. It is about intentionally reassigning people away from critical threats.
Exactly.
Thousands of personnel previously responsible for vital tasks like tracking complex terror financing networks were simply reassigned. This effectively paralyzed those critical financial investigations.
They also pointed to the Extremism Prevention Office, which was essentially gutted. To manage what was left of this crucial intelligence apparatus, the administration installed a 22-year-old intern.
You're kidding!
His primary listed qualification in the documents was participating in a Model United Nations club during his junior year of college.
A Model UN club running national extremism prevention. That is staggering, and these administrative decisions had devastating real-world consequences. It wasn't just theoretical risk.
Precisely. This shows what happens when an agency built for diverse emergency response becomes hyper-fixated on a single agenda. The bureaucratic muscle memory for saving lives literally atrophies. Consider the oversight of FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. Their fundamental mandate is disaster relief.
Right.
Yet during catastrophic floods in Central Texas, the department inexplicably withheld crucial support.
The details on this are just heartbreaking. Dedicated search and rescue teams were delayed for an agonizing 72 hours over bureaucratic red tape. 3 crucial days where citizens literally drowned waiting for paperwork clear in Washington.
The hearing notes that 135 people died in those Texas floods.
That included 25 young girls and 2 counselors who were trapped at a local Christian summer camp.
Representative Raskin compared the department's response to watching a house burn to the ground while the fire department stubbornly debates the administrative paperwork on the front lawn. It points to a profound operational failure. And this brings us to the operational reality of immigration and customs enforcement under this administration.
The initial public promise was to utilize ICE and CBP to strictly remove the most dangerous undocumented individuals, specifically those guilty of violent offenses. The administration pitched it as a targeted precision operation.
But the reality on the ground, as presented in the hearing, paints a vastly different picture. Instead of a scalpel, the committee described a wide, reckless, and blunt dragnet. Masked federal agents were reportedly indiscriminately detaining individuals based on mere physical appearance or proximity to a target.
We are talking about kindergartners swept up, daycare teachers, ordinary parents grabbed while dropping their kids off at school. The hearing documented horrific reports of grandparents being forcefully dragged from their homes in their undergarments during sub-zero temperatures.
They even documented cases of young children being used as strategic bait in the middle of the night to draw their parents out of hiding.
This systemic approach, this prioritization of raw numbers over targeted enforcement, culminated in the tragic case of Nurul Shah Alam. He was a severely disabled, nearly blind Rohingya refugee. Ilimdeki Verlaraguri, he resided entirely lawfully in the United States, but he spoke no English.
He had legal status, but he was swept up anyway. And the official departmental claim was that after realizing their mistake, agents dropped him off at a safe, warm location.
The reality as uncovered by the committee was starkly different. He wasn't taken to a shelter. He was abandoned miles from his home in the dark, outside a completely closed coffee shop in sub-freezing weather conditions.
Because he was legally blind and lacked the language skills to ask for help, he couldn't navigate his way to safety. As an undeniable consequence of this systemic negligence, he froze to death.
It makes you wonder about the sheer size of the force executing these orders.
That was a major point of discussion. The secretary directly commands over 80,000 sworn law enforcement officers. To put that massive domestic force into perspective for you, that is more than the total combined number of local police officers operating in New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, the District of Columbia, Las Vegas, and Dallas combined.
A literal standing army. And to fund this vast expanding infrastructure, an additional $75 billion was controversially diverted directly to ICE. They didn't just print new money, they slashed essential federal funds originally designated for Medicaid children's health insurance programs and highly vulnerable rural hospitals. They took healthcare money to fund the dragnet.
Furthermore, the legal and constitutional concerns raised by the committee were profound. It is crucial to note that it wasn't just partisan politicians objecting, it was the federal judiciary. In dozens of separate legal proceedings, federal judges had explicitly found that officials within the department provided false testimony under oath.
Did the hearing name any specific judges?
Yes, they made it a point to highlight judges judges appointed by conservative administrations to show this wasn't a partisan witch hunt. For instance, a judge appointed by President Reagan formally rejected the testimony of the acting ICE director. He didn't just dismiss it, he described it on the official record as disingenuous, squalid, and dishonorable.
Squalid is not a word you usually hear in judicial ruling. I also saw that another judge called a sworn affidavit submitted by a top ICE official the sorriest statement they had ever reviewed in their career on the bench. They stated that if a local beat cop requested a warrant based on such flimsy documentation, they would be laughed out of chambers.
Despite all of this, the secretary insisted under oath before the Senate that the department strictly adheres to court orders. But the established record presented by the committee contradicted her entirely. Her own legal team was forced to admit that the department had violated immigration court orders more than 50 times.
Over what time frame?
Within a narrow 10-week window. And that was just in New Jersey, which is only one of 94 judicial districts in the country. These weren't minor paperwork errors. The data shows they were ignoring stays of deportation, defying habeas corpus petitions, and essentially operating outside the boundaries set by the judicial branch.
In Minnesota, Judge Patrick Schultz, an appointee of George W. Bush, formally concluded that ICE had likely violated more court orders in January of 2026 alone than some entire federal agencies have violated throughout their entire institutional existence.
When you synthesize all of this information, the fatal shootings of citizens, the massive budgets diverted from healthcare, the luxury jets, the bureaucratic atrophy during disasters, and the sheer volume of judicial reprimands, you see the core conflict of this congressional hearing.
Right.
It represents what many legal scholars view as a sweeping systemic assault on the basic civil liberties of the American people, funded by billions of taxpayer dollars with zero internal accountability.
It is a dark picture, but it's so important to remember how everyday people responded to this reality. The hearing specifically highlighted the resilient citizens of Minneapolis as a powerful blueprint for democratic pushback. In the face of extreme governmental overreach and the tragic loss of Renee and Alex, they didn't fold.
They fought back, but not on the department's terms.
Exact. They fought back through community solidarity, mutual support, creative joy music, and mass nonviolent public assembly. They used the undeniable power of truth and community to actively challenge a massive federal system that seemed to have turned directly against its own people.
Ultimately, the hearing underscored a delicate and often precarious balance. The defined job of the Department of Homeland Security is to protect the homeland from external threats. Yet, as the committee passionately argued, the absolute most precious possession within U.S. borders is constitutional freedom unequivocally protected by the Bill of Rights.
Absolutely.
The fundamental question being debated in that room was whether the aggressive pursuit of total security had completely eroded the very liberties it was originally meant to defend.
It is the classic paradox of the one. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you digest all of the data from this. When the systems built to protect a homeland turn their massive unchecked resource inward, who is ultimately responsible to protect citizens from their attackers, kanalımıza lütfen abone olun.